Day 4. This was the day that I had an epiphany, or better yet, in English terms, a thought. The thought was that I couldn't use the pre-made enemies from RPG Maker because they don't really match the style the game I'm going for with the game, a more creepy undertone. So instead, I knew that I had to create some sprites. Now, the problem was I wasn't exactly the best at creating sprites. I can do pretty fine going off of other sprites, making hair, clothing, stuff like that, but creating my own sprites wasn't my ideal method of making a character. But I chugged along anyway. In this footage that you're seeing, I was creating the rabbit. This was mainly because I really didn't know that much about Alice in Wonderland. The characters that I did know were Tweedledee and Tweedledum, the Mad Hatter, the March Hare, the Dormouse, and of course the White Rabbit. But since I never actually saw the Alice in Wonderland movie, at least the Disney version, I really had nothing to go off of. The White Rabbit wasn't actually that difficult to make. But one thing that I tried to do was give him sort of a more creepy feature. So I gave him no pupils and made his eyes and mouth sort of droopy, like he was melting. He didn't really have a furry complex, but more of a blurriness to him. I also decided to keep his hands pretty much black, at least at that point. I eventually do change them to white in the video. The worst thing about this was the whole problem of size. What size was he going to be? Eventually, I went with the defined size that he was melting, so I needed to make him look more melting-like. But when I talked to Shay about it, he said that he wanted to see some legs, because with only one limb, he looked too mutilated, and it looked forced, like I was, of course, trying to scare you, not unintentionally, of course. That was kind of the goal, but I actually wasn't really going for a scare factor. More or less, I was going for a creep factor. Nothing to be too scary. I decided that I wasn't going to make a good enough arm if I attempted to with his other arm, so I decided to just take it off, and that's where the conversation with Shay happened. As you can see, I made the legs. Something didn't stick right with me though about the legs, mostly in the area that I didn't really like how they looked. This same problem happened with the hand. While it was cool to see sort of black claw thing, it didn't really look right to me, so I decided to bail on it, and I created his white hand. Now, I do still have some finer details, mostly around the face area that I still want to put in, but there are some other details I want to put around the body, such as maybe a coat, or maybe even a clock, because if you remember, if you've actually ever seen Alice in Wonderland, or read the story, which, like me, you would know that he has a stopwatch, or more accurately, a pocket watch that he carries around and Alice eventually finds and gives to him or whatever. Then I figured out there was a tool that let me bend the character and stretch him out. This was probably the best thing that could happen to me. Using this tool, I managed to make his face look much more intimidating than it did before, and it actually made him look like he was melting. I still had some areas that I needed to touch up on, especially around the arm and, of course, around the hand. His body was starting to become slowly detached from itself, so I needed to improvise. I needed definitely to write down exactly what I needed to do so that I wouldn't forget it. I tried a few other things like giving him pupils, but I decided to go with the more empty shell look. I then fixed up his leg area, and that was day 4.